Barnett. A little bit of a education video today about inventory in buying a business. One of the things that I typically came across a lot as a business broker when I was looking at arranging to help sellers sell their business is that businesses that had been successful for a long period of time typically had too much inventory. Why? Because it's easier to run a business with too much inventory. I'll give you an example. There was a business that I consulted with. They were in the business of installing wood-burning stoves. And in their basement, they had literal mountains of stovepipe and angles and connectors and all the doodads and doohickeys that go into installing these wood-burning stoves. And I asked the owner, I said, if you need to reorder inventory, how far away is it? And he was literally an hour's drive from a warehouse that carried all this stuff. And I said, why don't you get rid of the inventory, use it up, and move to a just-in-time system? You could probably take, actually, in literal fact, he could have taken $150,000 to $200,000 out of his business, and it would have functioned just exactly the same and made the same profit. I said, why don't you run with no inventory? Because you know when the installations are coming up what parts you're going to need for a particular home. Just order them and make an order every week of what you're going to need, and you won't have to have all this investment tied up in inventory. And he said to me that when he started his business, he used to run it that way, and as he grew more profitable and his equity built up in the business, he became lazier. So instead of taking the time to plan out what parts he was going to need and order them a week in advance, he simply started ordering a pallet of each kind of part and kept his own warehouse in the basement. And it literally ate up 150 grand worth of capital just sitting there so that he wouldn't have to take the time to make orders or have any of his employees make orders every week. When you buy a business, the value of the business is based on the cash flow. And what I found in several instances is that I was able to work with sellers and help them liquidate excess inventories before getting their business ready to sell. And it allowed them to take money out and put it in their pocket, and it didn't really affect the value of the business at all because the business's value is based on cash flow. On the flip side, there was one time when I was working with a buyer, and I was only working with the buyer, had no responsibilities or duties to the seller. And what we found is that the business was basically probably had about 3 or 4 times more inventory in it than was required. And we structured the purchase offer based upon the idea that the inventory would be liquidated after purchase. So the offer was for a certain down payment and then for the vendor to carry a vendor take-back note, which I've discussed before. So the vendor was financing part of the deal, but there was a balloon payment 6 months after the business was purchased of like 10 grand. And the idea was simply that the buyer would purchase the business, push the inventory that was sitting there, reduce the inventory levels, move more to a just-in-time kind of model, and it worked perfectly. The buyer was able to direct clients towards the older stock that was in the store and in the storeroom. It was a sort of a custom manufacturing type business, and people would come in, and the previous owner would just direct people to catalogs or photos, and ask people, what do you want? And she would order parts all the time. Whereas the new owner was kind of directing people and saying, look, I think this would suit your needs. Why don't we use these components? And they'd say, yeah, that looks good, and they'd be satisfied with that. So quite literally, the business bought itself simply because the buyer was willing to liquidate inventories that really should not have been built up at all in the first place. But again, the business was profitable over long term, and it's easier, I guess, if an owner wants to be a little bit lazy, to just allow inventory to accumulate rather than trying to control it strictly and manage the amount of capital investment in the business. Anyway, if you want to be smarter about small business and investing in small businesses and making money, then you should be reading my book, Invest Local, available from the blog site, investlocalbook.com, or from Amazon. Thanks. Talk to you soon.